It's 11 o'clock at night. Nothing went wrong today. Nobody hurt you. You're not in crisis. You just had a Tuesday. And yet your brain is running a full audit. That thing you said in a meeting 3 days ago, was the tone off? That text you sent, did it land the way you meant it? And this thing happening next week, you've already run 17 versions of how it might go, including 4 that probably won't happen. You're not lying awake because something is wrong. You're lying awake because your brain has not yet found a reason to stop. People who think too much know this feeling like a second language, and most of them have spent years wondering if there's something quietly, fundamentally wrong with them. There isn't. But there is something real going on, and understanding it might be the most useful thing you do all week. Here's what nobody tells you about people who overthink. The assumption is that they're anxious, fragile, stuck. That the constant mental activity is a symptom of some kind of dysfunction, a brain that didn't develop the off switch everyone else got. Here's the thing. Overthinking, at its root, is not a broken process. It's an overqualified one. The same mechanism that makes someone replay a conversation at midnight is the same mechanism that makes them notice what nobody else noticed in that conversation. The capacity for one cannot be separated from the cost of the other. And when you see it that way, everything shifts. Picture this. You're 9 years old, and the house you live in has a specific kind of atmosphere, not necessarily violent, not even obviously difficult. But the emotional temperature is unpredictable. One evening everything is fine. Another evening, the same words that were fine yesterday land badly today. You learn, without being taught, to read the room before you enter it, to calibrate, to anticipate. That skill, reading the subtleties of what's not being said, scanning for signals that tell you what's coming, that's not something you chose. Your nervous system chose it for you. Psychologist Martin Seligman's early work on learned helplessness showed that when a person exists repeatedly in environments where outcomes feel uncontrollable, the brain shifts its strategy. It stops trying to influence outcomes and starts trying to predict them instead. The logic is airtight. If I can see it coming, maybe I can brace for it. What that clinical framework doesn't quite capture is what it feels like from the inside. It feels like caring. It feels like thoroughness. It feels like being responsible, and eventually it becomes the only way you know how to think. The hyperactive scanning system that protected you in an unpredictable environment doesn't retire just because the environment changed. It keeps running. Just now it runs on ordinary Tuesdays at 11 p.m. But here's where it gets specific. You've been to the conversation before it happened. Multiple times. Before the difficult phone call, you've already had it 12 ways, with 12 different outcomes. Before the hard email, you've drafted the version that sounds too cold, the version that sounds too eager, and at least 3 versions that were fine but felt wrong in a way you couldn't name. Psychologists call this anticipatory rumination, the mind's attempt to pre-solve social risk by simulating future scenarios. And the reason it's so hard to stop isn't a lack of willpower. Research from the University of Toronto found that when the brain runs through imagined social scenarios, the neural pathways activated are nearly identical to those used during actual social interaction. Your brain doesn't fully distinguish between what it's imagining and what it's experiencing, which means it treats the rehearsal as real. It processes the emotional cost of the imagined rejection or misunderstanding with the same weight it would give the real thing. You're not catastrophizing. You're processing. The problem is that the process has no natural end state. There's no moment where the brain declares, enough variables have been considered, we're safe to stop. It just keeps running more tabs. But here's what's fascinating about this specific pattern. This one is harder to explain to people who don't experience it. You walk into a space, a dinner table, an office, a conversation that's been too normal for too long, and something registers. Not a thought, a knowing. Something is off. Someone is performing fine when they aren't. 2 people have not resolved what happened between them yesterday. You didn't analyze it. You received it. Researcher Elaine Hatfield at the University of Hawaii spent decades studying what she called emotional contagion, the way emotional states transmit between people beneath the level of words. Her findings showed that people with higher sensitivity to nonverbal cues don't just perceive more. Their own nervous systems mirror what they detect. They feel the room because they briefly become the room. For an overthinker, this means that every environment carries weight. Every interaction leaves a residue. And at the end of a full day of that kind of absorption, the brain doesn't go quiet. It begins to process everything it collected. That's not anxiety. That's a receipt being printed for everything your nervous system picked up while the rest of the room was looking at their phones. Ask an overthinker to pick a restaurant. Watch what happens. Not because they don't have preferences, but because the mind that considers 17 dimensions of every social situation applies the same processing power to choices that most people make in seconds. The menu becomes a variable. The preference of whoever they're with becomes a variable. How tired everyone is, which place has parking, whether the last time they went there the service was slightly off. All of it goes in. Psychologist Barry Schwartz named this the paradox of choice, the counterintuitive finding that more options and more analysis do not lead to better decisions or more satisfaction. They lead to higher anticipatory regret. The more thoroughly you think through a decision, the more weight each option carries, and the harder it becomes to commit. For an overthinker, this doesn't apply just to restaurants. It applies to texts, to career paths, to whether to bring something up or leave it alone. And here's the central contradiction that psychology keeps returning to. The person who thinks the most is often the least certain, not because they lack intelligence, but because intelligence, when turned inward at high volume, reveals complexity rather than hiding it. Every question they ask generates 2 more questions. Every answer they find opens a corridor of qualifications. A 2018 study in the journal Thinking and Reasoning found that individuals scoring higher on measures of reflective thinking were significantly more likely to revise their initial conclusions than those who thought less carefully, not because they were wrong more often, but because they stayed in inquiry longer. They refused to settle. You don't overthink because your mind is underdeveloped. You overthink because your mind won't accept a simple answer to a complicated world. That's not a defect. It is, however, exhausting. But here's what rarely gets acknowledged about all of this. There's a grief underneath the thinking. Not the grief of something lost. Not a person, not a relationship. The grief of a self that might have existed if the scanning had never started. The version of you that could sit with uncertainty without needing to resolve it. That could let a conversation end without running a post-mortem. That could make a choice without building a full simulation of every possible outcome first. That version is not gone, but somewhere along the way it got quieter. You grieve the lightness of a mind that trusts that things will be okay without needing proof. You grieve the ease of it. The version of you that didn't know yet how many ways things can go sideways, so they just didn't worry. Nobody told you that outgrowing carelessness would cost you rest. And nobody told you how much you'd miss it. So the next time your brain is still running at midnight, when everyone else has apparently closed their tabs, just know what's actually happening. Your mind is not broken. It is thorough. The same capacity that replays the conversation is the capacity that noticed what everyone else missed. The same wiring that runs 17 scenarios before bed is the wiring that catches the thing nobody else thought to consider. The same system that makes decisions feel costly is the system that takes other people's experiences seriously enough to actually weigh them. You did not develop this trait by accident. It was built, carefully over years, by a mind that needed to stay one step ahead of a world that wasn't always predictable. That's not pathology. That's engineering. And a mind that runs this deep doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be understood. Not by the people around you, by you. Still water runs deep. And deep water has always known something the surface couldn't see. If this felt like someone finally described your brain out loud, please subscribe. And if you want to support more psychology deep dives like this one, hit the join button below. I would genuinely appreciate it.